Great. Thank you and welcome back. It's really great to be leading this panel and chairing this panel on cybersecurity collaboration between the UK and Ukraine. And collaboration has obviously been a huge theme of all the topics that we've discussed today, whether it be UK-Ukraine, whether it be between government and industry. And I'm sure that we will touch more on that topic as we get into the conversation today. Just before we do, I think it's worth just putting some context around the cyber element of this and some of the salient points here. Firstly, for us in the UK, the government has been really vocal over the last few months about how the UK has seen persistent threats from Russia-aligned groups whom continue to target the UK, in part, of course, due to our support of Ukraine. And it's fair to say that cyber is a part of the conflict which we and other countries see impacting institutions, organizations, and citizens, both here and throughout NATO and other supporting countries. And when we do see that, I think the key point is that the severity of those attacks is far greater because they are ideologically based, ultimately, rather than being crime-based, which is what we've traditionally seen in the UK. The sort of overwhelming bulk of cyber has been crime-based. I think the second point is in cyber, it's an area where we can honestly say that the UK is truly world leading. So it is perhaps one of the places where we are best placed to support, both in the short term and in the long term as we look to strengthen our joint resilience. But of course, and as we've covered so much today, this obviously works both ways. Undoubtedly, Ukraine will be seeing threats, attacks on critical national infrastructure and other areas that we haven't encountered before. And that intelligence is critical for us to learn, understand how we adapt, react, and counter those threats for our long-term security as well. So that's hopefully what the panel will focus on. We have got a fantastic panel, which is definitely hybrid today, given we've got an even split of in-person and virtual. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. We're going to go in the order that is on your screen. So I'll ask each panelist just to give us a quick introduction for 2 minutes and also talk in broad terms about the context of their work in Ukraine. And then we can get into some good discussion. So Ola, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here. I'm Ola Derevyanko, and I'm co-founder and chairman of ISSP, which is a cybersecurity service provider that was founded in Ukraine back in 2008, when cybersecurity was not the term that was used. So that's why we're called ISSP, which is Information Systems Security Partners. And that's what we've been exactly doing since that time, and currently operating internationally. I'm also representing here Cyber Innovate, and this is a venture building studio and also an entity that aims at developing the startup ecosystem in Ukraine, specifically focused on deep tech and not just pure cyber. We just believe that cyber is just an essential component of anything you do these days. That's why this is something that we can bring to the table, not just the technical knowledge, but also entrepreneurial background. Yeah, so we've been at front lines of cyber war since 2014. And we've seen and we acted as first responders to and investigators of many of the most significant attacks that you heard of, or maybe some of them also experienced. Including all the power grid attacks and NotPetya infamous and many others. So yeah, I mean, I think that we can, when we'll go further into the discussion, we can discuss some specific questions. So over.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you, Matthew. So my name is Daniel Clark. I'm the Director of Applied Technologies at Galos Technologies. We're a venture studio, which means that we both invest in sort of early stage startups, but we also build companies. And so my role within Galos is to provide some sort of technical due diligence to when we review whether we invest in companies, and then also to work in some of the companies that we invest in, that we build, to provide some of that sort of deep technical expertise I've built up over a number of years. I'm also a lecturer in cyber and electromagnetic warfare with Cranfield University, and so it's kind of a really interesting space to look at both emerging technology and the role that both cyber and electromagnetic activities have in that emerging technology space. And I think in the context of Ukraine, one of the things that's become really, really apparent over the last 2 years is that emerging technology has some real sort of lots of potential to impact lots of different areas, from both defense, but also outside of defense. And what we're seeing technologies that have been developed outside of defense being spun into defense. And what this then means in terms of cybersecurity is that there's a need to understand some of the sort of susceptibilities, the vulnerabilities, and how to address those susceptibilities and vulnerabilities across a wide range of technologies, from what's essentially toy drones that are used for sort of racing and sort of hobbyists, all the way through to securing critical national infrastructure. And so that cybersecurity question spans the entire tactical space up to the strategic space, but it also spans the commercial space all the way through to the government security and defense space. And so really looking forward to sort of expanding on some of those points throughout this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Valu.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Val Kennedy, and I run the National Security Investigations team at Chainalysis. So backing up a minute, Chainalysis is a blockchain analytics firm. So we serve public and private sector globally, and we provide data services or investigative services, as well as software. And what we basically do is assign people, places, and things to blockchain data. So the blockchain is a public, immutable ledger that appeals to both traditional users and criminals alike, because it is borderless, it's cheap, and it's instantaneous. So from an investigative side, what we work with our public sector partners, both in the UK and Ukraine on, is helping them derive insights regarding what cyber criminals are using the blockchain for. So within the context of today's conversation, specifically, how are Russian cyber criminals using the blockchain, both against UK critical infrastructure, as well as against Ukraine? So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks, Val. Joseph.
Hi, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm Joe Janecki. I'm a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute, a defence and security think tank based in London that's conducted a lot of work across the context of the war, specifically looking a lot at the kinetic impacts. But we've also done quite a bit of work internally, thinking about the cybersecurity repercussions. A lot of our work has been focused on the overt international cyber capability support that's been provided by the UK government, as well as partners through the Ukraine Cyber Capability Fund and other associated programs, as well as then the activities by big tech actors like Microsoft, Google Tag, and AWS, as well as other individuals. Looking forward to talking about these topics today.
Thank you. And Yevgen.
Hi, hello, colleagues. I'm happy actually that I'm kind of lost in such a short introduction, because I heard a lot of brilliant things and I have a lot of connection and to say with all the people who was presented here and who made such beautiful introduction. So my name is Yevgen Kotuch. I'm Chief Application Security Engineer in Givera Software. We do a lot of software development on demand, on request, as a service, as a platform, as an infrastructure, everything. So, and here I'm in charge of the projects and the process security. But in civil now, we are kind of, focused on a lot of activities with armed forces of Ukraine. But in civil life, I'm also PhD in information security, and I'm professor of crime investigation department in State Tax University, and my major is digital forensic and cybercrime investigation. So And here we have also a lot of points to discuss and a lot of connections with the beautiful people who are in this panel right now. So let's talk, and I propose to start our discussion, which I believe will be more than fruitful.
Brilliant, thank you. I will, as everyone else has done, open up for questions in a little bit. So please do start thinking about what those could be. But just a starting question for the panel. And if you're online, please just sort of jump in or stick your hand up, whichever you feel like. But how's the threat landscape developed and escalated over the course of the conflict? And in particular, sort of what does this mean in Ukraine, but also how have we seen those threats develop outside Ukraine in terms of either the spillover or the targeted impact on Ukraine's allies as well? I don't know who would like to sort of take that first question, but Ola, you've obviously had a lot of experience in Ukraine since 2014 in particular. I don't know if you want to just outline how, from your perspective, how you've seen that threat landscape develop.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I think that there are two things that are worth mentioning here, because I mean there's a lot of information available, a lot of white papers, articles and observations out there which are easily available. I would say that the most critical question that comes to my mind, which actually was kind of intriguing for everyone over the course of this year, is exactly the same as it was for the conventional military. Why Ukraine didn't fail? So because everyone expected, Ukraine to fail in the military battlefield, all those 3-5 days or weeks or whatever. And the same was expected in cyber. And there were, of course, two versions immediately. One that whether the power of Russian cyber capabilities was overestimated, and there were some ideas like this, or whether it's Ukraine has become significantly stronger. And I would not underestimate cyber capabilities of Russians or other countries of their allies like Iran or North Korea or others. And the fact is that everyone, if we're talking about not about the professional community, because we have here, less technical discussion, but more kind of broader, high-level discussion. And if we talk about at this level, at high level, and not necessarily like too much technically, then it's really important from my perspective to emphasize that when it comes to cyber attacks, everyone is used to think of, okay, like if there's a cyber attack, then something needs to happen. It should be some damage, some disruption, and so on. And if people don't see that, if it's not reported by media, it kind of seems to the general public or decision makers who are outside of professional community that there's no cyber attacks. But the reality is that there was approximately 5-time increase in number of attacks from the in the period from 2018 to 2020, with approximately 2,000 of them in 2020. Then if you look at the statistics from 2020 to 2021, Ukraine was the second most attacked country, 46% of all the attack. And this, I guess, was presented by Microsoft Defense in their report, that Ukraine was in 90% of the cases, after just the United States with 46% of the cases. The target was Ukraine, and with UK coming the third one with 9%, and then some countries with 3%, and then everyone else. So and we can see, and Ukraine at that time didn't have lots of capabilities and capacities to defend at the governmental level. So talking about the attack surface management was, or the capabilities from the government perspective, governmental agencies was very limited. But the private sector, and specifically the operators of the critical infrastructure in the private sector, in state-owned enterprises, they were taking care of cyber very seriously over the course of last several years. And we saw the impact of that, the positive impact of that, because you can imagine, of course, again, the general public may expect that if the cyber attacks happens, everything's disrupted and so on. But of course, cyber, fortunately, does not have the capacity of rocket missile just to hit the target and immediately, at least as of today, we haven't seen that. But when you would think of possibility when those attacks on critical infrastructure, the physical kinetic attacks started to happen, and Ukraine had to face the need to balance the capacities, to quickly navigate in this ever-changing landscape. And if you would imagine that at this moment, the computer systems of those operators would fail, then it would be a true catastrophe. And the reason, so that means that the cyber played extremely significant role in Ukraine's resilience from all kind of perspective, this critical infrastructure perspective, but also the services for people when everyone was on the move, the availability of banking services, of telcos, and so on. That was extremely important. Maybe from the perspective of the Russian operations, I would just finish by saying that, well, they started as usually with prepared attacks. So the launched attack that they were preparing, the famous case of Viasat and some other attacks, and in every case where they actually reached some significant results, those were the attacks where they had presence before the invasion began, which just is another proof of the fact that cyber attacks take time to undertake. It doesn't happen like this. You can shoot an attack like a missile and it is successful. And after this wave of prepared attacks, there were there were kind of a rush of doing a lot of noisy attacks that didn't create a lot of damage, and it looked like they were kind of trying to do at least anything to prove to their chain of command that they can do something. But then they moved to their kind of get back to their traditional way of cyber operations. And I think that this is the current trend that we're going to see in the future. Russians didn't have problems with having access to Ukrainian, to information in Ukraine within the authorities and so on before the invasion. But since Ukraine is now, have been doing better and better in terms of kicking off Russian agents from all the institutions, the importance of intelligence and espionage operations has been increasing dramatically for Russians, and I think that this would be the main focus. We will see less disruption attacks, because every disruption means that you lose the access, typically, not always, but typically. So we will see less and less disruptive attacks and more espionage attacks, insider threats, and of course hack and leak operations, both real and fake, and this merger between the influence operation, psyops, and cyber is gonna grow, and in terms of significance and the quantity. Yeah, that's
Thanks, Oleg.
kind of an overview.
I think that's a really good sort of context for us. I don't know if anyone else wants to just chip in on. Daniel, do you want to?
Yeah, can I? So I think there's three really, really key and important observations here. I think the first one is that when you think of traditional war fighting, you think of military capability. But what we've seen over the last 10 years is that actually a lot of cyber attacks have have targeted non-military capabilities. So any technology that forms a part of sort of civil society. That's the first observation. The second one is a lot of those attacks have been not as successful as they could have been because of the resilience of those civilian companies. So you're looking at Viasat, for example, looking at sort of, you know, how sort of AWS supported back in 2021. That resilience was absolutely key to enabling Ukraine to continue to function and continue to resist. And then I think the third key observation is that because those attacks targeted non-traditional or non-military sort of capabilities, so some of those civilian capabilities, there were second and third order effects that probably weren't considered. Viasat being a great example, it had an impact, I think, in Germany, according to the news. So that context of it's not limited to tanks and aircraft, these kind of this cybersecurity problem. Civilian companies can be a part of the solution by sort of, you know, introducing that resilience. And actually, just because you don't sell technology directly into one country, it doesn't mean that you're not susceptible in another country or in another region, because the linkages in that technology are really important.
Great, thank you. Moving on, just in terms of, you know, I think Ola gave a very good overview in terms of how that landscape's developed. In terms of how industry, government collaborate, partner together, work together, are we arguably sort of more resilient today than we were 2 years ago when it comes to the cyber domain? And what lessons are there for us and how we take that going forward? Don't know if any of our... Joseph, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I think in terms of thinking around how public-private partnership has evolved in this context, there are three areas I think we can look at in terms of how the private sector has acted to strengthen resilience. I think there's the activities that have been undertaken for first the existing customers and users that have been supported. Secondly, then there's additional unilateral activity that's been provided, for example, by big tech actors in support of Ukrainian resilience. And then finally, and this is something I'll unpick a little bit in terms of what we can take forward in future, it's activity procured or contracted by international governments in support of third country government, in this case, Ukraine. So what are we looking at in that context, and how can that take us forward? So the UK's Ukraine cyber program procured a series of cybersecurity capabilities on behalf of or for Ukrainian government entities, as well as some major state-owned enterprises. This included incident response services, attack surface management, DDoS protection, these kind of capabilities. All of those were procured, contracted directly by, in this case, the UK government's FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, the equivalent to an MFA in any other country, and then were delivered to these organizations. If we kind of compare and contrast that to how other national cyber incidents, for example, recently in Montenegro, in Albania, in Vanuatu, have been dealt with by similar countries to the UK, Australia, the US, France, there's a stark difference in the integration of the private sector in these activities. So to compare and contrast, the EU's CRRT, an acronym that I can never remember the section of, provides support to national cyber crisis incidents with the deployment of their CERT teams, so their indigenous capability or their domestic capability. The UK's Ukraine cyber program illustrated the possibility of integrating private sector capabilities in a deployed manner, in an active manner, thereby reducing the trade-off or the opportunity cost of providing support whilst not exhausting technical capabilities that are resident within a particular UK national agency. So, for example, no one from NCSC had to go and deploy ASM individually. It could be procured to a private sector partner that was integrated on an NCSC assured list, for example. So I think there's an interesting piece here in terms of how we move forward with public-private partnership, in terms of how that relationship can move forward, in terms of how support can be integrated in future contexts.
Great, thanks, Joe.
Just quickly piggyback off of that. First of all, just going back to how the cyber threat landscape has changed in the context of ransomware, because that point was recently raised. I think that what is interesting about the Russian war in Ukraine is it was sort of a moment of who's who and what's what in the ransomware landscape. So you saw a lot of groups, first of all, testing things in Ukraine that were later tested on Western allies. You also saw groups like Killnet actually declaring allegiances for the Russian government, things like that. So out of that, we were able to more granularly see and understand who's directly benefiting the Russian government, who is maybe unaffiliated and just in it for financial gains, and things like that. And for that reason, I think that Ukraine is sort of being on the front lines of these things, is sitting on some incredible data, and is also able to anticipate some of what's to come, unfortunately, for Western allies. Matthew, you brought up a really good point at the start here. It's been so interesting to see this more politicized version of ransomware, where you have the UK declaring support to the Ukrainian government or offering an aid package, and almost immediately thereafter, critical infrastructure being attacked by Killnet or TrickBot or another ransomware group or strain. So for that reason, I think public and private partnership has increased and bettered in the last year, but I still think that there's a lot of work to be done in collaborating with Ukraine to understand what they're seeing on the front lines and collaborate more quickly, and also collaborate with industry. I'm biased, but industry like ourselves, so that there's that real fluid flow of information and we can stop these things in real time. Also occasionally anticipate possibly what's to come and really strengthen our defense. So I hope to see improvements on that moving forward, but I think we've already been able to accomplish a lot in the last year.
Great, thank you. We heard from some of the panelists earlier in terms of the drone industry that's obviously taken off there was a pun in there, you might have missed it, in Ukraine. In terms of the cyber ecosystem, how has that grown, adapted, during the course of the conflict? Yevgen, I don't know if you want to comment in terms of the strength and sort of ambition of the Ukrainian.
Yeah, sure, of course. So let me start by saying that since 2014 and those days when we faced the Petya, Ouroboros incident in Prikarpatia Energy, a lot of lessons was actually really learned by our government, right? And for now, we have a cybersecurity strategy. We have their taxonomy and understanding what is a critical infrastructure is, what is a critical information infrastructure is, and what is a state information resources, and actually the strategy and the guidelines on how we're gonna protect them. And just like coming back to the last question, I would like to say that the private and public sector cooperation in Ukraine was made a lot for the success on cyber warfare within the Russian right now, right? Because I'm very feel like very thankful to our government that they not like made a lot of mistakes. They asked a lot of questions on how to. They received a lot of information from private sector on best practices, on everything, and such a cooperation brought a lot of positive results in a very few months within the Russian aggression starts, right? And now we can face that the number of attacks is really huge on Ukraine. However, you can find a lot of reviews by different experts worldwide and even in the European Union also, which they saying that they expect the much more influence and impact of those cyber activities rather than it's actually on the way on how actually they was implemented and been done, right? So coming back to cybersecurity and some practical standpoints, I believe Ukraine is one of the headliner here, and we are coming with not just like policies and procedures, we are coming not with the adaptation of international standards. We have a lot of practical experience which we can share with, and for now, even our clients with those in UK, we have like Cyber Essentials, right, which the UK companies, a small medium business has to follow. And our clients coming back to us just with their to get some practical experience on how they would make the cyber essential implementation, not just like formally done, but also with some practices which can defend themselves from the Russian aggression and the experience that Ukraine already got on this point. So that's the things which I would like to highlight.
Great, thank you. I promised I would come out to the audience with some questions. So I think Daniel's just getting a microphone, but are there any questions that the audience has? Clearly, we've answered them all. I'll exert my usual right to ask a couple more questions as chair then. But Daniel, I think Galos works really at sort of that interface between government and sort of the commercial sector. What lessons do you think can be drawn around that ability to work at pace, the balance of where risk lies, and some of those lessons for the future as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really wide question. I'm going to try and narrow and focus the answer a little bit more on sort of maybe technology as a whole. And I think I've articulated already, but the idea of deploying sort of technology that wasn't designed for defense but into defense purposes is really, really key. And certainly with a lot of emerging technologies and in cybersecurity as well, we're seeing technologies that have had sort of little exposure to traditional defense applications now being leveraged quite successfully. And I think that's going to be one of the core things we're going to see over the next 5 years is more and more of these technologies, and cybersecurity, security technologies being key among them, sort of being developed outside of defense and then spun into defense. And I think from a defense perspective, and I say this as defense as a whole, principally across Europe, is defense is going to have to learn that it can't necessarily afford to develop these tools from 0 through to 1. It's going to have to take these tools and learn how to use those tools and deploy those tools in defense of not only its defense technology, but also you know, the underpinning civic infrastructure. So sort of, you know, one of my favorite areas at the moment is in autonomous vehicles. My background being electromagnetic warfare, I'm starting to see nearly as much research coming out of the automotive domain in sort of, you know, RF signals jamming, which is, in my opinion, an area of cybersecurity. So as much coming out of the automotive industry as out of the defense industry in a topic that's called electromagnetic warfare. So how can you know, governments, how can governments pull this technology into their use, but also how can companies and organizations build this technology so that it's useful in a commercial perspective, but also has viability in sort of, you know, government security and defense as well.
Great, thank you. Val, I know part of this sort of online conflict is being fought in crypto, is being fought in blockchain and other realms. Can you tell us a bit about sort of chain analysis's role in the conflict to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just start by a quick crypto evangelizing. Firstly, I think when people think about crypto as part of this landscape, they just think about like simple peer-to-peer payments, but there are so many elements in which the blockchain fits into this broader conflict. So first of all, we've spent a lot of time talking about ransomware. So again, ransomware, extremely pervasive threat. We're actually predicting that 2023 might be the most prolific year that we've ever seen in terms of ransomware payment volume. But you also have different areas that fit within that defense framework. So for example, election interference. You might not think of crypto as playing a role in that, but you actually have payments for troll farms happening in cryptocurrency as well. Attack of critical infrastructure, we've spent some time talking on. But then also from a hard warfare perspective or traditional warfare perspective, we've seen Russian military militia groups actually soliciting donations in cryptocurrency. We also then see them turn around and purchase weapons and other military equipment, again, on the darknet using cryptocurrency. So all of that just to say that this is much more than just sort of a peer-to-peer payment or something that shows up when we're talking about ransomware. It's sort of extremely pervasive across the entirety of that cyber threat landscape. And so the way that chain analysis works is we embed and work really closely with our public sector partners to try to tackle this threat and provide that real-time information. Again, both to sort of allies like the UK, we have a pretty big presence in the UK, work really closely with our public sector partners here, but then also gathering intelligence from Ukraine, supporting Ukraine with real-time support, on-the-ground support as well. For example, giving training to the Ukrainians, also spending time alongside our law enforcement partners to be able to understand where those threat actors are located, what they're doing, how can we support them, and how can we deter them moving forward as well.
Great, thanks, Val. Joe, I know, Bruce, you've been engaged in sort of capacity building, including around cyber. Can you give us a bit more information in terms of what that looks like and what sort of actions are going forward as well?
So I'll just contextualize that a little bit. So there's been a kind of a policy quandary amidst Ukraine's international allies who are kind of Western states who are highly capable cyber powers around the desire to provide cyber capabilities to Ukraine versus cyber capacities, and the deviation there, and this is particularly the deviation in the context of overt provisions, not covert. So the deviation there between capability and capacity is this idea of looking to build in a developmental lens a sustainable capacity such that Ukraine can perform activities entirely of its own behest. And I think that there was initially a quite naive assumption that Ukraine lacked a lot of capability and lacked a lot of capacity and lacked a lot of abilities to conduct these things and had a less mature cyber industry than is actually the case, because as partly Ole described, the extent of the cyber industry has developed through continuous attacks, being perceived as a kind of a test lab for Russian activity since 2014, if not earlier. So there's been a kind of a persistent desire to push towards cyber capacities by many allies and partners, but then more recently an acceptance has been, I think, acknowledged through many partners that cyber capability provision is completely valid and salient in the current context, because the threshold has clearly been passed for direct assistance, and there's less concern around winding that down in the short to medium term because of the immediate urgent operational requirement for this activity. So in the context of what RUSI does and what we do, to touch on that, it's mostly thinking about the nature of the activity that is being implemented, what learnings we can take from this cyber crisis into other contexts. And already Ukrainian officials, including Viktor Zora, are publicly speaking on the saliency of the experience of Ukraine in other contexts, as well as then what we can do moving forward. I think there's been a stabilization to some extent, and now potentially moving back towards a point where capacity activities are slightly more valuable than capability, but I think it remains an open discussion.
Great question from the audience. Just towards the back. If you can just say who you are, where you're from.
My name is Nadia Vasilieva. I'm from VC Fund, Freedom Fund. We are working with military tech. My question is the following. So currently, because of internet doesn't have any national borders, we have a very wide threat for other nations, not only Ukraine, like the war currently in Ukraine. And to what we see currently, that the threat what we have destroy the limits between cybersecurity and cyber defense. And in that case, I would like to ask all of you, so where this limit you can see? And the second one, in connecting to that, do you see there any possibility, for example, for UK, Ukraine, or US, or any other partners together to work on the cyber armed forces in that case, or some kind of cyber defense armed forces? So what do you think about that? And especially my question is so strong because I think the threat what we have currently for the private people compared to war, it's much more bigger from the cybersecurity side than from the military side. Because each of us has computer, each of us has personal devices, each of us has the personal information on our devices. So that's a question to you. Where is the limit between cybersecurity and cyber defense? And do you see any kind of international cyber armed forces? Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we'll wrap that up in some closing remarks from each of you as well. We'll go sort of reverse up the slide to give Ola a chance to have a think about his answer. Yevgen, coming to you, sort of where's that balance between cyber defense, cybersecurity? Where do you see some of those things developing? And I'll leave it to you whether you want to take that question on sort of a cyber armed forces or whether it's a mix of collaboration. Over to you.
Yeah, it's actually a great question. However, from technical perspective, I don't really feel that such a margin or limit exists, right? We are approaching quantum era, and I am actually one of the researchers on the Ukrainian side of post-quantum asymmetric cryptography, and you know that the most of the data transformation and data transmission and transition in the world now is using the old algorithm of asymmetric cryptography, which still pretends to be strong. However, there is a theoretical and already some practical experience and research which says us that within like next 20 years, all RSA and elliptic curve cryptography will be broken. And here the question is, like, if we are talking about private security, what if some people already collected the old data of a future president of Ukraine or future president of United States, or future prime minister of United Kingdom, right? And within the quantum excellence and quantum commercial capabilities, such a data, yeah, it will not be actual for those days when these people start to be claim themselves as the president and prime minister. However, what if it's happened like this data will be just decrypted, right? And all this private and personal data become public, right? So it's possibly could happen. Possibly we can see and face that such a problem exists, and post-quantum data migration is actually one of the key things here when we're discussing such a limit or margin between cyber defense and cybersecurity, right? And we need to be prepared for such period of time. And this is kind of technical standpoint, right? It's a lot of political standpoints also, and international development and affairs, which could be also being present on such context. But I believe such a tech point for now, with such my short message, will be enough to at least wave some our auditoria to think about it.
And Joe, your quick response and to that question as well.
A very quick response to the first question would be that I probably don't see too much of a distinction either between cybersecurity and cyber defense. I think if we look at the case of Costa Rica, where large-scale compromises of cybersecurity of government activities crippled the functions that you would assume should be covered under cyber defense, and there's a kind of a continuity between the two in my mind, but maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. And then the second point, I think it's quite interesting with regards to the potential proliferation or creation of collaborative or cooperative cyber operations between military or military adjacent forces in countries like, or between countries like UK, Ukraine, US, and so on. I think there are some interesting signs that are pointing towards that point. So we already have an increasingly a recognition by all relevant, or let's say kind of take NATO countries, for example, a pretty wide recognition of cyber as a domain, as a distinct domain, which is a key requisite to furthering collaboration and cooperation. And then we have some institutions and organizations being set up as point leads for military or military adjacent type activities within several countries. So again, to take the UK as an example, we have the National Cyber Force being established, which has an intentional remit related to offensive cyber activities, for example, as well as aspects of their activities which are involving international collaboration and cooperation. And then finally, at the activity layer, we have several instances of collaborative and cooperative activity on cyber operations already. If we take, for example, the US Cyber Command's hunt forward operations, part of their kind of doctrine of persistent engagement involves the hunt forward operations whereby agents or officials or soldiers, however you want to frame them, from US Cyber Command will go, and they did this in Ukraine. They've done it recently in other countries, I believe. And they'll work through networks tracking and trying to expel adversaries. For me, this is almost already at the point where there are sophisticated military related or military adjacent activities that are being cooperatively that are being undertaken on cyber.
Great, thanks, Joe. Val, your quick response as well, please.
Sure, I'll speak from maybe the blockchain perspective, just to put a spin on things here. But I think that really great point raised by my co-panelists from a cybersecurity perspective. Another way to think about that or highlight that issue is the fact that so much of public sector ransomware attacks are the initial sort of attack vector is through potentially a private sector partner that they might have, or through some kind of partner in the field. So it's important that you not only have extremely strong and built up public sector infrastructure, but also similarly with private sector partners as well. And then from the perspective of sort of global or Western partnership on these issues, I think it's extremely important, even again, thinking from a crypto perspective, to think about freezing assets as they're moving on the blockchain. It's a borderless system. So you need to be able to quickly communicate to your partners where funds might moving to a partner that might have jurisdiction and be able to freeze that asset, because you have something like 20 minutes, sometimes even less than that, as soon as funds start freezing. So you need to hear from private sector that's watching these in real time, not just from a national nexus, but from a global nexus. You need to hear from your Ukrainian counterparts, from your UK counterparts, and really collaborate to not only be able to avoid and stop cyber attacks, but also deter them from happening by freezing those assets once someone pays a ransom, for example.
Great, thank you. Daniel.
Yeah, that's a great question on integration. I think actually looking across, particularly the UK and US, and the doctrine that's coming out of the UK, US MOD and US DOD is the concept of the integrated operating concept and sort of multi-domain integration, multi-domain operations. And that integration is really key. So integration across 5 domains: air, land, sea, space, and cyber electromagnetic. Cyber electromagnetic being the integrator of the 4 other domains, in my opinion. But also it's integration across sort of partners within government, it's integration across governments, and it's integration across society as well. So it's that sort of concept of not just, you know, defense and security, but also that sort of protect, constrain, engage part before you come into the sort of, you know, the defense context of warfighting. So absolutely, yes, I think it's going to happen. I think it is happening. And I just think it needs a little bit more impetus, both from industry and government to make it happen.
Brilliant. Ola. You're on mute, unfortunately. I think.
Sorry, how much time do I have?
The other Daniel Clark is saying I'm already running over time. So as succinct as possible, please.
Well, doesn't help. Yeah, look, I think that Nadia's question is very valid, but I think it's a whole new discussion. First of all, Ukrainian offensive armed forces and cyber were established on paper right before the full-scale invasion. I mean, like several months before, like end of 2021. Now they've been rapidly developing, but Ukraine at the moment enjoys the privilege of being able to have the best and brightest minds on board of their military on different units that deal with on all fronts, you know, conventional military, cyber, electronic warfare, and so on and so forth. But that won't be the case when the war will be over. Many of those folks will just go back to private sector, and that will be a huge challenge for the future. How you keep them or how you attract new ones and so on. And that, because this is the essential component. If you talk about any cyber operations between the nations, it's what you bring to the table, what's your capability. I don't think, I mean, the joint operations sounds to me a little bit tricky, but defensive cooperation is of course paramount, and it's already happening. And As you know, Ukraine has joined as a contributing participant the NATO Cooperative Defense Center of Excellence already. And the help that Joseph has mentioned was very important from a perspective that for us as a private sector, we couldn't properly cooperate with the government institutions because they were basically lacking the basic technologies. Now they have stepped up significantly in terms of their threat intel technologies and capabilities. They are much more ready to cooperate with the private sector. But I would like at the end to touch one very specific, because we are Tech UK and it's Tech Days. So I would say that there's a tremendous potential for Ukraine and allies and vice versa to tap into the Ukrainian technical talent and think how we what new products and services could be brought to the market. We are very focused on that. We for example just launched a program because we don't lack technical talent, but we lack entrepreneurs who are ready to develop great startups. So we just launched with Oxford and some others the program called Mission Possible. Highly recommended to technical founders. Go to LinkedIn or elsewhere and find it. So it would be a program specifically focused on developing people who are innovators and technically capable, but want to become entrepreneurs, want to create a company, so want to succeed. And from lessons learned, Ukraine also needs to learn the lesson. And there's several lessons that not just technical, but from a very high level perspective. We need, today Israel is also on the agenda, right? But Ukraine is still very, very far behind in terms of introducing the laws and regulations that will help Ukrainian startups to prosper and develop, and help Ukrainian government and state to benefit from that. For example, the laws that would, for example, let the where the IP is created, then when the exit is happening, the country where most of the IP was created should somehow benefit from that, which is not the case today. We know how many best and great and prominent startups have been developed almost entirely in Ukraine, and Ukraine, as I said, gets nothing from that, just literally, except the people who are staying in Ukraine and having their centers and contribute to economic activity. So there's a lot of things that we can explore, and I'm very happy that Tech UK organized this event. I hope that we could continue this discussion in multiple directions, not just technical cooperation, but also cooperation in terms of building new companies and startups, and for the benefit of all the free world. Thank you.
Great. I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. Please join me in thanking our panelists in the usual way.